was my mentor and gave me all the information about, well, that might be a stretch. She pushed me up onto this pulpit once before. But the problem from learning from somebody like Rev D is that she doesn't write things down, which means she didn't teach me to write things down. So it's going to be an adventure to see where we end up. So my topic this morning is the call to honor and the will to love. We are living in an extraordinary time. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah. And there's plenty of opportunity for practice when it comes to honoring and to loving. And that is more or less what I want to talk about. So, what does it mean to honor? Essentially, we're in a time in which it is popular, in a sense, to be mean to one another. And there's a certain gratification that you get when you're able to be mean to somebody that somebody else doesn't like. Because that person gives you a pat on the back. Somebody's encouraging you to be mean. You're getting positive feedback for that. And that's the pattern that we really, now more than ever, have to interrupt. Amen. We're going to have to take that courageous step to be unpopular, to be uncool, to be liked a little bit less in service of honoring one another. Yes. When a baby shows up in the world, we don't say that we don't like that baby. I mean, maybe you do. If that's you got to work on that. But for the most part, let's say we don't tell babies we don't like them, right? And then the kids get a little older. Maybe they do things that are annoying, but we don't dislike those kids. And then they get a little older, and they're teenagers, and they know everything in the entire world ever. And maybe they're annoying, but you don't dislike them. Where is the line? Where is that point of maturation at which it's okay to say, that person's stupid, or that person is a terrible person, or a bad person, or a horrible person, beyond redemption, beyond likability, beyond love, beyond honoring, beyond their own dignity? Where do we cross that threshold? We don't really have a good answer for that. But we become less patient the older we get. And the older other people get, the less patient we are with their own maturation process, with their own understanding of the world. But those people are still people. Those people still have relationships. They still love somebody. Somebody still loves them. They're somebody's child. They're somebody's sister or brother. They're somebody's uncle or best friend. Those people are still people, worthy of being loved, worthy of having their dignity. And we are in a time in which we are being called to honor the dignity in other people. It's really hard sometimes, isn't it? It's really hard. And I'm not washing away somebody making bad decisions or somebody being hurtful or unkind or maybe manipulative. I'm not saying you have to be in close relationship with that person. Obviously, you have to set boundaries. You don't want to be around people who are going to hurt you. And that's the self-reflective part that you have to do. Because this isn't just as simple as saying, fine, I'll love that person, but I'm still not going to like them. And nothing in me is going to change in me just saying, fine, I'll give them their dignity back. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that you have to be courageous enough to do a self-reflective inventory, really digging out those places inside of yourself where you've arrived at conclusions that somebody else might have given you. We're deferring our decision-making capacity. We're saying, you decide how we feel about this, then you let me know what I'm supposed to do about it. That's lazy, and it's problematic. And I'm not going to let you do it anymore. Somebody is going to have to call you on it. If that's got to be me, fine. I'll be that person. But we can't keep deferring our own decision-making ability. When we come out into the world, we have parents or guardians or grandparents or uncles and aunts and friends and people who give us their understanding of the world, their perspective, right? And that's natural. You guide your children towards certain conclusions, or you guide your grandchildren towards certain conclusions, and all of those things are perfectly normal. But at a certain point, that person has to have the sense of self enough to think about what their worldview is. If you haven't done that, now's the time. Now's the time to look at the world and think, what do I believe to be true? That's what you're doing in this room. You came here to find out what you believe to be true. Like many of you, possibly, certainly this is true for me, I don't know what God is. And I know that that's strange, being on a pulpit in a church, right? But if you ask me to define what God is, I can't. I don't know. And I'll do you one better. I'm not sure if I believe in God. I'm not sure if I believe in the traditional idea of God. But I do believe in good. I do believe in people's dignity. I do believe in a search for something deeper than yourself. I believe that there's something interconnected between all people. And when I turn around and I hate somebody, or I dismiss them, or I'm unkind to them, it's not them I'm hurting. It's me. There's a part of myself that I'm removing. There's a part of my own dignity that I'm blocking. And if that's where you have to start, that's fine. If you have to start from a selfish place that says, you know what, I'm no longer going to degrade myself by disliking you, that's fine. Start there. And then you're going to have to look out at people who are different than you. If when you go to your friend's house, or you go to your family and you look around the table and all the people are the same, it might be time to get out and find some people who are a little different than you. Because when you're hanging out with people who are all the same, you're getting all the same ideas. You're getting all the same concepts. And here's where we've made a mistake. Where we've made a mistake is by saying that there's something wrong with recognizing our differences. That's where we made a mistake. And we made that mistake with absolutely good intentions. We said, you know what, we don't want to categorize people by skin color or religion or sexual orientation or gender. We don't want to do that, so we're going to pretend like that doesn't exist. Well, that's a mistake. And it's okay that we made that mistake with good intentions. But when you know better, you got to do better, and now you know better. So you got to recognize and honor that people have differences. And you know what's great about differences is that they're different. They think about things differently, right? They come to different conclusions with different ideas, different cultural perspectives, different ideologies, different understandings of God, of life, of love, of relationships, of all these things. And it's too simple to say one person's right or one person's wrong. If you wanted to come to this church this morning, and then you wanted to go to a Baptist church next week, and then you wanted to go to a Buddhist temple after that, you should. Because there's so many different perspectives. There's so much to learn. There's so much variety in humanity. You're doing yourself a disservice to only be around people who are just like you. And I don't mean who are adjacent to you. So let's say you're politically left-leaning, to just hang out with moderates and say that you're doing a great job at hanging out with people who are different than you. I mean, really have a hard conversation with somebody who is diametrically opposed to you. I almost said diabolically, which would have been a bad slip of the tongue on my part. But really on the quote-unquote opposite end. Because what you'll find is that while you think you're on the opposite end of a line, you're really on the other end of a circle. There's a large gradation of things in between. And here's the other thing. You can hold multiple sets of beliefs at the same time. And you're selling yourself short if you don't give yourself the opportunity to feel that level of discomfort. To say, you know what, there are some things that I agree with over here, even though I mostly stand over here. And we don't have time. We really don't have time in this era that we're in to give up any good ideas. Especially not to give up those good ideas just because you are committed to believing that you're right. The world needs you right now to make as many mistakes as you possibly can. Because we need you to have the vulnerability and the capacity to say, I am wrong. I made a mistake. I arrived at this conclusion, and you know what? I'm not set on staying here. I'm okay with moving somewhere else. That is the call to honor. Now, once you're willing to honor, once you've heard that call and you're willing to do the self-inventory that's required to get there, what's next is developing the capacity to love. This is similar to the will to love, but right now I'm just talking about the capacity. Loving is a weird thing. Loving is an odd emotion, right? If you said, how do you know that you love somebody? I think it'd be really hard to quantify. And for me, if somebody said, well, how do you know that you love your partner? That's a really good question. Sometimes I don't know, honestly. Sometimes I'm like, why am I in the same house with you? But you know that you still love them, even though they're irritating you. It doesn't diminish your ability to love somebody, but it's a hard thing to quantify. It's a hard thing to understand what you're doing, but when you see it, you know it, right? When you feel it, you know. So if you know what it's like to be loving in some aspect of your life, you have the ability to access that in other parts. And what I'm asking you is to access that in the parts where you typically don't want to. Where you don't want to is usually where you should. Where you know you can, keep doing that. But that's easy, right? It's usually easy to love somebody you already love. And I'm going to give you an example of this. A social example. Back in the day, when Harvey Milk was working on getting people to come out, he understood something fundamental. And this is true, actually, of Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and all those great social leaders. They understood something really fundamental, which was if you already loved somebody, it was very hard to dislike them for some aspect of their life you didn't agree with. So if somebody was your sister, for example, and you were on the end of the scale where you said being gay is terrible, horrible crime against humanity, but now your sister comes to you and tells you she's gay. Well, now you've got a problem. Now you think all gay people are the worst thing that's ever happened, and somebody you love is gay. How can those two things exist in the same place? They can't. That's the point. Now, in some cases, somebody might choose to hold on to their belief over their relationship. I don't know if there's much you can do about that. But in most cases, people were willing to say, my sense of loyalty and love to this person overcomes my intellectual understanding of this thing. And that's where we're at. For most of us, the things that we're opposed to are ideas in our mind. They're conclusions that we've arrived at about how society should work, or how politics should go, or how our relationships should be, or this person is this thing to me, and therefore they should fill all of these roles and check all of these boxes, and anything outside of that is unacceptable. But if you love that person, if you have a relationship with that person, and not love them romantically, love them, or even love them within the context of a relationship, but if you can understand that that person is a human being who has dignity, who has some sense of humanity that you can understand, that you can see. You know what? I don't like what this person stands for, but I know that somebody loves them, and that means they are worthy of being loved. If I can give them back that level of dignity, then I can be more understanding of the position they've arrived at. You know what's really fascinating about this? When you give somebody back their humanity, back their dignity, and you allow them to be themselves, more often than not, they'll meet you in the middle. And you're going to find something really fascinating about yourself, that you are willing to move to the middle. Oftentimes when somebody tells us we're wrong and we think that they're wrong, we are going to dig in. We're going to dig in our heels, and just purely out of spite, not even out of an absolute sense of knowing or truth or anything like that, just to prove that person wrong, we're going to stay right where we are. I'll show you by not moving. And what ends up happening with that? You end up diminishing your own capacity to change, to learn. How many of you believe the same things that you believed at 20? I'd hope most of us don't believe, unless you're in your 20s, then hey, I can't help you with that. But if you're out of your 20s, you probably don't believe the same things that you believed when you were 20. And you shouldn't. And then here's the other part. We're going to have to have some empathy. We're going to have to give people the opportunity to change without throwing it in their face. Because that's what we're doing now. Well, if somebody changes their opinion, they're wishy-washy. They're indecisive. Or, well, that's not what you said last week. Well, isn't that what you wanted? Didn't you want them to not say what they said last week? Wasn't that the point of this entire thing? Was that somebody might move from where they were? So if you're holding it against somebody, if you're being unwilling to forgive, if you're being unwilling to give ground, you're not being willing to love. And that's what we need, right? Can we agree that we're in a world right now that needs you to be loving more than ever? Yes. So that means you're going to have to be forgiving. You're going to have to give people the space to change. You're going to have to give yourself the space to change. Because when you say to somebody, you can't change, you're saying, I can't change. And when you're saying, I can't change, you're not saying you can't change, because you can change. You can change anything. If you make a decision and you follow through with the commitment, what you're saying is, I won't change. And more than what you're saying when you say, I won't change, you're saying you're not worth changing for. Not only are you not worth changing for, I'm not worth changing for. Not only am I not worth changing for, this world isn't worth changing for. And if you're going to be stuck in that position, and you're going to stick the next person into that position, and they stick the next person in that position, we're all going off a cliff real fast. You have got to be willing to change. You've got to be willing to give somebody else the opportunity to change. And that's what love is. That's all that love is. You don't have to go into long, deep, philosophical discussions about what is this thing or what is that thing. The reading today was from The Calling. And it said, I'm going to honor your sovereignty. I'm going to honor your ability to make your own decisions. And I'm going to love you no matter what you choose. I've spoken about this before, but I have a friend who's a childhood friend of mine who, I wouldn't say he is now, but he was at the time that we reconnected a number of years ago. He was a skinhead. And not a skinhead like he hangs out on online forums. I mean a bona fide skinhead. He has white power tattooed across his back. He is a bona fide skinhead. He's also my brother. I love that guy. I've known him since we were kids. We grew up together. Don't you think it's funny that life gave him a brother who's half brown and transgender? Oh, that's a spoiler alert. I am transgender, in case you were wondering who I was talking about. That's a tidbit of information you might have needed prior to that statement. But the point is that life gives you the opportunities to make the changes that you need to make. He didn't arrive at that conclusion because that's what he thought was the most sensible thing. He arrived at that conclusion because there was something missing. He was feeling frustrated, and he was feeling angst, and he was feeling sorrow and sadness, and somebody came along and said, you know what, it's not your fault, it's their fault. And he said, you know what, great, perfect, sign me up for that excuse. That sounds good, I'm all in. And if somebody hadn't come along and just been patient, just been loving, just said, you know what, I love you because I've loved you since we were kids, and I'm not going to judge you for this thing, and maybe privately I think you're stupid, but I'm still going to listen to you and love you and be kind and talk to me about it. And how'd you get there? How did you get there? How did you draw those conclusions? That's interesting. Why do you feel that way? That is all it took. Because after a while, he realized, you know what? These are kind of dumb conclusions. And then after a while, I thought, that is interesting, isn't it? That in a way, we have kind of marginalized you. We've called you stupid, or thoughtless, or hateful, or angry. And maybe those are your actions, but that's not who you are. And I never gave that a second look. I never gave that a second thought. I thought he was wrong, so I approached him like he was wrong. And I never gave him his humanity. I never gave him his dignity. I never said, wait a second, why do you feel like that? And when we had the opportunity to do that for one another, we were able to come to the middle. And is it hard? Yeah. Is it frustrating? Of course. Do you sometimes get in a fight and not talk for 3 days? Yeah, we did. Many a time. But I still loved him. We were still able to have those hard discussions. And you know what's really interesting is if he bumps into something and he's frustrated about it or he doesn't understand it, he calls. Hey, I saw this thing. It's really bugging me. I feel like this about it. What do you think? What do you think? And I tell him what I think. And what do you think about it? He tells me what he thinks. And then we're able to have a civil discussion. And that's what the world needs right now. Civil discussions. Are some of the things that somebody says disgusting? Sometimes. Are they infuriating? Sometimes. Do they feel insulting? Sometimes. Does it feel like somebody's taking something from you? Yeah, it does sometimes. And you still get to protect yourself and show up in those relationships with an openness and a kindness and a willingness to love. And if you can't, then you act like an adult and you walk out of the room and you say, somebody else has to have this discussion. What you don't do is turn around and insult that person or write them off. You can't do that. We don't have time for that. Now, what I'm not saying is don't have any boundaries. What I'm not saying is put yourself in harm's way. What I'm not saying is allow somebody to be abusive or manipulative or mean or violent or angry. Use your judgment. You know. That's what allies are for. That's why you get some people around you that can have those hard discussions and put themselves in between you and that person if need be. But you can't really get allies if you can't be open to letting people in, right? Because somebody who isn't in your specific little spot in the world doesn't know exactly what it's like to be in that little spot of the world. So you have to let them in. You have to show them. You have to be open and vulnerable and willing to let somebody in, let somebody love you, let them see from your perspective. And then that person is able to go out and advocate for you and act on your behalf. We have to have the confidence to do that. Okay, I'm using the word confidence because what I see actually is a lot of insecurity. There's a lot of insecurity that shows up in the form of putting somebody else down so that you feel better about yourself. Like, oh, how stupid you are for thinking that thing. Look how great I am for knowing better. That's insecurity. So you got to be comfortable in your own skin. You got to be self-reflective and understand where are the spaces in my own mind where I fall short, where I can't have this discussion. And you know what? Sometimes you got to be the bad guy. Sometimes you have to be the one that just made the mistake, that just hurt somebody's feelings, that just upset somebody. Not on purpose, but you just have to accept that sometimes that's going to happen. That somebody's going to walk away from a discussion thinking badly about you. And it sucks, and it feels yucky, and it's okay. It doesn't mean you are a bad person. It doesn't mean that's the totality of your being, that you make mistakes, or that you're dumb, or that you can't think about things critically, or you don't have the capacity to understand where somebody else is coming from. If that is the conclusion that you're drawing from misunderstandings, that's insecurity. And then you can do the work. You can do the work you need. And that's what this place is for, right? It's about doing the work. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to mess up or say the wrong thing. And it's okay to have people around you that are going to call you on it. But what you have to be is willing. That's what you have to be. Okay? That is an absolute necessity. You have to be willing. If you come in a room thinking you got all the answers, you probably don't. I studied cultural anthropology in college, mostly because it didn't have any math. But my professor that I had for, I think it was religious, some kind of religion, something or other, said something really interesting. They said, you can always tell when something is a religion because they put forth a theory that has all the answers. Doesn't that make sense? Because a religion, faith, spirituality, is all built around being able to answer the unanswerable. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because when you're feeling something that is so inexplicable, you want nothing more than to know something out there has an answer. I don't understand why this horrific thing happened, but God does. And we have a long tradition as humans of storytelling, of creating mythologies and stories and fables and things that help us to understand what we can't possibly understand. All of the big life questions. How did we get here? What's our purpose? What happens after? Why do bad things happen? Why do good things happen? All of those things are encompassed within religion. And if you think about that within the context of humanity as we evolved and began telling stories to give people answers, to comfort them. And you know what? When you're in something like grief, knowing that there's somebody, something that is helping and loving and guiding and protecting, God, that feels good. And so when you look around at people who are deeply religious, you can have some compassion for that, can't you? What they're saying is they want to know that there's an order to the world. That makes a lot of sense. And that's all I'm asking you to do. Just have some compassion. Just try to step into somebody else's shoes. And if you can't, it's okay. But don't put people down who are trying. That is the call to honor and the will to love. Amen? Amen. Amen. Let us pray.